Welcome to Doctor on Call with your host, DocGriffon. The doctor will be with you momentarily. Our guest this evening is iconic musician, director, and winemaker, Gerald Casale. Sorry if I mispronounced that one. The
It's
interview you
close.
are about close enough. The interview you are about to hear is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. Only the facts have been changed to protect the guilty. DocGriffon, paging DocGriffon, you're needed in the OR stat.
And thank you very much, Nurse Aiden. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a very particular case on our hands. The diagnosis has been made previously as a form of CPP, which is chronic pervasive parativism. Now, for those of my students who don't know what that is, it is a condition where an individual uses artistic expression, such as dance, music, or art, to convey complex societal issues in a thought-provoking way. So with that in mind, it is my pleasure to welcome to our show, Mr. Gerald Casale. And how are you this evening, sir?
I'm just loving every minute of this planet.
Well, now that's definitely a good thing. And I will have a little fanboy service because as a matter of fact, in my top 10 albums of all time, you have at least one of them in there.
Great.
And we'll run around to that in just a moment.
Which one?
Oh no, it's Devo.
Oh yeah.
And
that's not a typical one. I like that.
And I'll get to the reasons when we get to the timeline a little bit farther down the road, but the one thing that I'm always curious about, and that my audience is curious about, is the roots, where it began.
Right.
And
right.
I'm very curious. Did you have a musically inclined family as well? Now, I know your brother Bob was in the band, but as far as your parents, were they musical people?
Well, apparently my father was, but I never knew that until he was near death.
Oh. Was he an instrumentalist, a vocalist?
He played. He played in a marching drum corps. He was a drum major. He was also, the guy that is like the guy that marches in front of the band with the big baton.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
And he was apparently quite a dancer, like a big time, where they would go to these clubs and dance. So he was a very good dancer, but I never knew any of this until near death.
So, as you were growing up, was this, did they encourage you to branch out into the arts, or was this something that you kind of discovered on your own?
Yeah, okay. Well, that's my dog Beta chiming in. No, they didn't encourage me artistically at all. I was a blue collar kid from working class family.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of both of my parents were first generation born here. My mom was Irish, born from an Irish immigrant who came here to work on the railroads. My father was born from an Italian that came and settled in New York. And he was then orphaned. So my mother and father met after the war in Ohio, believe it or not, because after my dad got back from fighting on the ground in Germany during World War II, he landed the third day of Normandy and fought his way through France and Germany.
Wow.
And got a Purple Heart, came back, and started searching for his birth father that led him to Akron, Ohio.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And that's where he met my mom.
Did he succeed?
He found him. Yes, he found his father. Yes. And
Excellent.
when I was 4 years old, I met his real father for the first time.
And so, as a kid growing up, definitely blue collar in Akron, Ohio. what led you into picking up an actual instrument? I mean, there must have been some type of catalyst that kind of eased you along the way.
Certainly. Well, I mean, look, I had a very, kind of unhappy upbringing. I was born 6 weeks early and put in an incubator.
Oh my!
But that probably set the track for life. So my mom didn't even, get to hold me until I got out of this incubator, and then I'm like living this very blue collar kind of poor lower middle class life with two Catholics that were just naive and devout and believed that birth control was sin. So, they had many more children. They would have had 7, but twins died. So they had 5.
Wow.
And, they probably could have afforded maybe 1 or 2, but they had 5. And that's the way I grew up. And I grew up as the whole cultural explosion happened. I was hitting puberty. So I went from Elvis to the Beatles to the Rolling Stones to, Jimi Hendrix and James Brown in a few-year period, watching any politician and any visionary who gave the culture hope get assassinated or jailed.
Yeah.
And I had a high IQ, so I was doing very well in school. I was highly motivated and believed in authority at that point until I didn't. But I was, I was motivated to achieve. And so the only reason I got out of my whole, horrible kind of fate was through getting a scholarship to go to Kent State University by applying for it with the help of a couple of my high school teachers. And because of my high SAT scores, I got the scholarship. So I escaped this blue collar life. My parents wanted me to go work in a factory, and they hated my anti-war stance. They hated that I grew my hair, so I had to leave home when I was 17. And that's what I embraced music because I would just listen incessantly to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and early Chicago blues and rural blues like John Lee Hooker, and then got hooked on Motown and James Brown. And that's all. That's what I was convinced I was going to do. But of course, my scholarship was in English literature and journalism. So I was taking 16-hour course loads on a quarter system and scoring, had to keep a high grade point average to keep my scholarship. So I was in some program called the Honors College within Kent State University.
Now,
were getting politicized.
Did you have to sign up for the draft?
Oh, I was drafted. I had a low number. Yeah, the Republicans made sure that the student deferments were taken away, so that even going to college didn't stop you from getting drafted to die in Vietnam. So I luckily had a family doctor back when people actually had family doctors that came to their homes. And this guy was a great guy, Dr. Jacobs. And I think what he did in retrospect was gin up a case where my hernia was much more serious than it really was.
Oh.
And it got me a deferment. So he wrote down, as a doctor on some form that I had a inguinal hernia, and I got deferred. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I'm sure I would have died.
See, because I always thought that, and I came just a little bit after you. I thought that that college could be a deferment, but
it was. And right when I was going to start my sophomore year, they ended that program. I mean, look, as bad as everything is today, and as fascistic and polarized and defying all intelligence and rationale. What I was living through, believe it or not, was even worse. In fact, from 1968 to 1972, you know, let's forget the JFK assassination when I was 15, but starting like with Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and Malcolm X and so many others, leading up to Nixon trying to expand the Vietnam War illegally into Cambodia, and then me being in the middle of the shootings at Kent State as a member of SDS, where I lucked out because they shot over our heads at students behind us. And I knew two of the four that were murdered, Allison Krauss and Jeffrey Miller, because
Wow.
I had admitted them to the Honors College, because part of my scholarship was having to work during the summer to admit new students and walk them through registration and develop their curriculum. And
Well,
guess who two of my caseloads were? Jeffrey Miller and Allison Krauss.
well, and can we backtrack just a little bit, because I do have a very young audience as well.
Yeah.
They may know about the Kent State shootings,
Yeah.
Which I would preferably call them the Kent State murders, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
Can you backtrack a little bit about how that incident came to being? Because you were there, you saw it, you had boots on the ground.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, in 1968, Mark Rudd from Columbia University, who'd started Students for a Democratic Society, came to the Kent State campus to recruit, to see who would sign up to SDS. And he gave some pretty articulate, impassioned speeches, because what students back then were railing against are all the things you're seeing now. They were railing against, you know, the centralized corporate control of government by big money. They were railing against deep corruption at the top levels of government and an unjust, immoral war. They were railing against the Republicans eating away at First Amendment rights and women's rights. And the difference was that the students and the youth in general were very informed, because the education system had not been decimated. You could get a really good public education, and I'm not kidding. I got a great one. Really great teachers, great reading lists, encouraging you to think critically, to write papers that were analytical, and to make history a living idea rather than, you know, guys in costumes. And the reason there was such massive protests is because the students and the youth in general knew what the Constitution and the Bill of Rights said, and knew what the government was doing was wrong and anti-democratic. And this is what the fight was. So I was a member of SDS, and that's what they were fighting against.
And for those who
when
don't know what
1970
SDS
rolled around, what's that?
and for those who don't know what SDS is, it's Students for a Democratic Society.
Yeah, I said that. And so when 1970 rolled around and Vietnam was getting really ugly, Nixon expanded the war into Cambodia. He started bombing Cambodia without any permission from Congress. So without getting permission from Congress, he unilaterally expanded the war. And so it was announced by, like, you know, there were only 3 networks then, and Walter Cronkite was the guy that had credibility. And he came on a Friday night and on a Saturday, on a weekend, and told the American public what was going on. So, of course, all the students mobilized and planned a protest for the following Monday to protest this illegal expansion of the Vietnam War. That's what we were doing there on May 4th, 1970, at noon on the campus at Kent State University, when National Guard came out of several buildings where they had been embedded on the weekend before, unbeknownst to us, surrounded us like, you know, a typical, like almost 300 Spartans, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we were trapped, and they had M1 rifles, they had gas masks, they had jeeps and paddy wagons, and they were herding us into an area over the hill from where students normally met, called the Commons, past the journalism building, where they could then take us onto buses and take us to jail in Ravenna, Ohio. And
Okay.
so the students started, of course, putting masks on their, I mean, like cloths on their faces, and trying to grab the tear gas canisters and throw them back. And we got to a point where there was a face-off where we're standing looking at them. They're on top of the hill looking down at us. They stop. We stop. And it's just a weird moment of frozen face-off. Like, what is going on? What are they doing? And that's when they formed a formation, almost like the Civil War. Some of them were kneeling. Some of them were standing. They lowered their guns with their bayonets. And we thought it was a ritual where they were going to charge us with the bayonets to scare us, so we'd keep backing up into the student parking lot where they could put us on buses.
Hmm.
Well, instead of moving, we saw one of the what's called an adjutant general, who was commanding them, like screaming. We couldn't know what he was saying. They had gas masks on. And then he made a gesture, which all of us up front saw. And he, you know, almost like somebody starting an Indianapolis 500 race without a flag. He uses his hand, and they all shot. So they shot something like 31 rounds in 10 seconds. And we didn't even know what was happening. We had no idea that guns would actually be loaded with live, you know, M1 rifle bullets, which are lethal.
Oh, yeah.
And they shot over our heads, and I think they did. My theory is they did so because they were 19 or 20. We were 19 or 20. They could see our faces. We could see them, although they were in masks. And I think, you know, they didn't have it in them to actually target individual students and kill them. So I think they shot over the front people down towards the crowd like a duck shoot, rationalizing that, hey, we're just spraying them with bullets. I don't know where this bullet's going to go. And then that next moment was like, you know, what's become a cliche in films like Raging Bull, or the famous movie about the cross-country races or whatever, where you have the slow-mo, it goes into slow-mo, and you hear sound effects with like echo and echoplex going, you know, that's what it was like. It was,
Man,
everybody froze. The sound went away. You couldn't hear anything. I just remember the bare trees because, you know, it had been winter, and that was the first spring day. There were buds on the trees, but no leaves. And I just remember those bare trees, and I fell down on the ground because I felt so sick at what I saw that I was going to pass out. I knew I couldn't stand up, so I fell on the grass. And then the screaming began, and then the realization began, where you look around, and I saw Jeffrey Miller laying on his belly, and I saw blood pouring down the walkway, famous picture that exists. And in the noonday sun, where the blood is just like unbelievably like fire engine red and starts to coagulate in the heat. I saw people standing around Allison Krauss screaming her name. And we were frozen there, and we were frozen there for, you know, all laying on the ground, being told not to move because we didn't know what would happen next, for 2 hours. And the ambulances came and took the dead bodies away and the wounded away. And then they formed, the guard formed a huge, like, double line, like a phalanx, leading to the front of campus, and marched us off campus in single file between them, and closed the campus for for the whole summer. For
Wow.
there until the fall, the campus was yellow taped like a crime scene, and there was martial law for 2 weeks, and we were made to be. All students couldn't be seen on the streets after 7 o'clock. There were National Guard helicopters flying around monitoring the town. There were deputized locals, hillbillies, right-wingers with pistols and rifles driving around in Chevy Biscaynes looking for students. It was, I was convinced, for years and years and years after that, that was the worst point of my life.
And my God, I mean, that is a chilling account, and I literally have goosebumps. Because I don't know. I honestly, and I'll put this to the chat too. I mean, what would you have done in that situation? That is so incredibly surreal. I mean,
oh yeah, surreal's the word, because everybody can talk theoretically about what they do and about violence and about guns, but then when you see the real deal and you see what an M1 bullet does to a body with the exit wound, you're just a scared little animal. You are freaked. It's a nervous breakdown time. That's what I'm sure I had.
Yeah, I'm some of the images that are burned into my mind forever was the Life magazine article where it showed the one woman kneeling and screaming.
She's screaming over Jeffrey Miller.
Yeah,
that's him.
I mean, that's unforgettable. Anybody who has not seen that, please feel free to go ahead and Google that afterwards.
Since I'm on a phone, since I'm on a ridiculous phone, I can walk around here and I'll show you the picture.
Oh my.
Oh yeah. It's like, for me, it's like, devout Christians that have pictures of Jesus. To me, this is 20th century martyrdom. Here you go. Can you see that?
Yes.
There she is screaming over Jeffrey Miller's body. The blood is running her direction, and it has followed her where her knees are, but gone further against the curb there. That's what I saw. And Allison Krauss was to the left of all that action, up that driveway to the student parking lot.
And honestly, I think even though it was a horrendous thing, that this helped really turn the tide to get us out of Vietnam.
I'd like to think so, but I'm not sure about that. Well, this didn't do anything either.
Oh.
There's Lee Harvey getting plugged by Jack Ruby 2 days after Lee shot JFK and killed him, or at least one of the people that shot JFK. So, and then we have this.
Oh my.
You see why it's a beautiful world.
Yeah, and
it goes on and on. Humans are pieces of shit. Most humans are pieces of shit. I can tell you that.
Yeah, there are many garbage humans lurking out there, and that's one of the things that drew me to your music. But we haven't gotten to the point yet where you picked up your instrument. Now, was that kind of in the same allegory? Instead of picking up a rifle, you decided to pick up an instrument and try to speak about this?
Well, as my politicization was developing, and before 1970, I was in a couple, silly local bands that were playing, like, the Rolling Stones, Chuck Berry, the Beatles, and I was the singer. And then I picked up the bass guitar in 1970, just before the killings. And it was really after that I changed completely, and my life changed completely. And so at that point, I had sung in bands and I had been playing the bass. But now, something crystallized. Everything kind of came together. I got the big picture that everything I had believed was true, and everything I had been told by teachers and authority figures was bullshit completely, and that it was like the allegory of the cave, Plato, where the children believe in the shadows on the cave wall and have no idea what's going on outside. Well, now I did. Now I understood how history has been written by those who are the victors and have the power of the narrative, and how it's all a self-serving fucking lie. And I witnessed it firsthand, and I started getting very analytical and very political. And I lost my scholarship to Ann Arbor University because after the killings at Kent State, four states, the governors got together and banned all out-of-state students who had been members of any activist political group. So because I was a member of SDS, I couldn't go to Ann Arbor. So I had to turn around with my tail between my legs and go back to Kent State as a graduate student. But that turned out to be totally lucky for the wrong reasons. It was these visiting professors came, one from England, one from the Black Mountain College, another one from Berkeley. And I was enrolled in these classes, and these guys now were upping the game. They were giving me a reading list and talking about how things work, and how who really controls things behind the scenes, the puppet masters, not our idiotic carnival, kangaroo court politicians that are there as a distraction where you think you have real choices being made and they're really selected, not elected, which I think should be by now really obvious to everybody today with Trump. If you didn't know it before, if you don't know it now, you're a fucking moron. And you're watching this go down, and he is just the distraction so that the real puppet masters can get the real agenda done, which is getting rid of the democratic rule of law and establishing a fascistic plutocracy. And it's being done. They've got all the pegs in place, and after they get Kavanaugh in, it's over. It's over. If you think you will even have any rights left to go backwards, you're a sad baby.
Well, and speaking personally, I found that when I was listening to your music, a lot of people are like, oh, well, that's fun. That's kind of poppy. And I said, well, are you guys listening to the lyrics?
Yeah. Well, what we were trying to do is use some satire and some humor to warn people in a creative way of the impending, destruction of a humane society. And of course, we were trivialized and simplified by an idiotic rock press that didn't get it. And you're right. It sounded perky and caffeinated and happy enough that people could ignore any of the substance and just get off on the energy and the danceability of some of the songs. But Devo came from a very holistic place, a big, worked out concept, a whole worldview. That's why we had a kind of alternative reality. We had terminology we created. We created characters. We talked about, Spudland and ninnies and twits and pinheads. And we were trying to describe what happens when people abdicate their personal power, when they abdicate it, when they give up power to central control, when they don't question authority, when they don't fight illegitimate authority, what can happen to them? They took their kind of democratic freedoms for granted. And all it did is turn into mindless consumerism. And that's why today you don't even have mass protests. People just want to keep their jobs, don't want to get in trouble. They want their, iced frappuccino, latte, decaf, whatever the fuck they get. That's such ridiculous shit. And they all feel special because they can have it their way. And it's sad. It's disgusting.
Well, and it's amazing because in the chat it's a firestorm of people going back and forth at each other. I think the general message here is it's not a preaching of socialism. It's not a preaching of communism or ultra right or ultra left. It's more of people being called to arms to take responsibility for themselves.
Yeah, all this terminology, all this, everybody labels, and because that way they can dispense with the substance of any idea or any like political decision or whatever, because if you can label it and make a disparaging kind of like, sin out of that label, it's over. In other words, the whole dynamic that's been created by American media is WWF. It's like Crossfire. Like, here's the bad wrestler. He's got the devil mask. And here's the good wrestler. He's got the lamb mask on. They're going to fight. Oh, my God, he hit him over the head with a chair. And it's all a show. It's Barnum and Bailey. People are buying into this, like my team, my good wrestler, my bad guy. And then the real puppet masters laugh their asses off because you've got millions of people fighting each other, ready to kill each other. And that's what they want. And they're exploiting everyone. They're fucking all of you morons. It's ridiculous. Nobody has the insight and the analytical kind of rational thought to look through it, to look through to the other side and see the scam. In fact, less than ever. Less than ever, because the education system was destroyed over the last 40 years. Public education's a joke, and that's what they wanted.
I don't think anybody, whether they're on the right or the left in the chat, would disagree that the destruction of society has generally come through the deferment of actual real education.
Well, yeah. And why is there the left and the right? This is so stupid. What does that mean? Really, what the fuck does that mean?
And yeah, I mean, this is a conversation that we've done a lot off of the stream with my friends and myself, and we've always come to the decision that if you take your personal choice, if you take your personal rights out of it, then you honestly don't deserve to be a citizen. If you don't stand up for what you believe, and regardless if you're on the right or the left, if you don't stand up for what you believe, then you're of no use to prospering society and pushing it forward.
Well, I mean, our system was supposedly a live and let live philosophy by the forefathers, where it's like, okay, the liberty for you to throw a punch ends at my face, right? In other words, okay, go ahead, you can be a breeder. Go ahead and have 12 babies, but don't tell me that my wife and I have to have 12 babies. What the fuck is that about? Why do you force me to live like you when I'm not forcing you to live like me?
And everything you're saying keeps popping back to your band's lyrics. Because there's some amazing stuff in there that people just don't realize. But in the formulation, the early part of the band, now I know I've been in bands myself, most of them huge failures because of the fact that it was hard to be able to focus and walk down the same path. How did you get to the point and be able to propagate that for 40 years? I mean, where did it start?
Yeah. I really think it couldn't have happened anywhere but Akron and Kent, Ohio, because of the atmosphere we were growing up in was so kind of toxic and filled with mean people and like anti-intellectual people and you know, hillbillies and evangelicals and people just very, very, very hostile to ideas. That if you're an artist, if you're a free thinker, if you believe in liberty, if you're following your ideas, you're a, you know, you're a victim, you're a target. So you band together out of a desire to survive. You find each other because people that don't fit the mold, you know, pop out at each other back there. It isn't like the big city. And so, you know, this was a survival tactic. This was like a way to form an alternate identity, to not succumb, like to believe in yourself, to refuse to give up. And then beyond that, I think it's because we were operating in a wasteland that we got 4 or 5 years to gestate and get better and better and better and write a body of work. And in the basements and you know, garages that we were practicing in, nobody cared. Nobody would even come around. And if they did, they either hated us or felt sorry for us. They thought we were idiots, laughed at. So unlike, you know, one gig in New York City where suddenly overnight the press either christens you or kills you, we got to like build and build and build so that when we came out in the world fully formed with a body of work and a live show that was real and intense and we could really play, it kind of took people by surprise and they were stunned. So they didn't even know to criticize us at first. They just said, you have to see this. What the fuck is this?
So I'm going to guess that since you formed in college and you were a college band, that you got a lot of practice doing frat parties.
No, no, I was way outside of frat by the time. There we go. By the time I met Mark Mothersbaugh, you know, it was like 1972. And so the idea of Devo had been hatched, and Deevolution was, you know, something that my friends and I in college that I hung out with had talked about over and over and over. But I hadn't made any musical application. Devo was an art movement for me. I was an artist, and I was making what I said was Devo art. So, and what it really was, when I look back at it, was performance art, but there was no word there was no term performance art. But sure. That's what I was doing. That's what I was doing. And it was, I was attacking the vapid, tired, stale gallery scene and the terrible art. And I would go in dressed as this character named Gorge. And I'd have my mascot on a leash, Poot Man, that was my friend Jim. And we were both wearing masks. I wore this mask called the Gorge Mask that's been written about and everything, and it shows up in the Devo book that just came out. And Jim would wear a black wrestling hood, black wrestling shorts, black wrestling shoes, and he would crawl on all fours. And I had an enema bag bandolero, and I would walk up to each painting and point at it, and I'd say, "Poot Man, what do you think?" And he would turn around and wiggle his ass and hold his nose and pretend to like wipe his ass on the paintings, and then I'd reward him with milk out of my enema bag bandolero. We'd last maybe 5 minutes before security would kick us out, threaten us, and people would be horrified and move out of the way.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't really understand that in the 70s, art was really pretty vapid.
Really vapid.
There was really, I mean, it was more society being told, hey, this is good, instead of people walking up and judging it themselves.
Well, it was completely derivative in landscapes, or more kind of like imitations of Jackson Pollock, you know,
or shitty cubism.
shitty, yeah, all imitations of movements that were 30 and 40, 50 years old. And so that's the guy Mark met. And Mark was doing his own brand of kind of like early, what might be called graffiti art. He was making silkscreen decals and sticking them on like trophy cases in the, in the various buildings on campus that would, have sports trophies or,
Well,
different.
And that's honestly the beauty of art, the fluidity of it, because once something grows stale or moldy, then all of a sudden it just kind of evolves, so to speak, or devolves in Devo's case.
Right. Well, that's right. And I mean, maybe in reality, all this again terminology, maybe devolution was an evolution, because what we were saying was this whole kind of fantasy of progress that had been pushed, like this linear progress and consumerism, and there was going to be flying cars and domed cities, and everybody was going to be affluent, and there was going to be a big leisure class. We didn't see that. We didn't see things getting better. We saw them getting worse. We saw people getting less able to think. We saw people grasping at, McDonald's ads on TV and sound bites, and listening to right-wing televangelical preachers, and buying into, Richard Nixon. And we saw society getting sadder and grimier, and we lived through all that, all the assassinations, all the hideous fallout from the evil Vietnam War. Then terrorism began, and the embargoes and the gas crisis, and it was sad. And we saw Akron physically shriveling up because the rubber companies left, the economy went in the toilet, people were losing their homes. This was the world we saw. We didn't see progress, so we called it de-evolution. We didn't see evolution, and we saw both economic and cultural de-evolution.
And honestly, not to be demeaning to anybody in the chat right now in our audience, but a lot of the people are too young to know about the gas lines.
Yeah.
I mean, too young to know about, rolling huge rolling blackouts.
Yes.
And all this stuff was happening, and it seemed that once Reagan took office, all of that just kind of got tucked away. Let's go ahead and forget about that and kind of move on. But as far as it goes, socially, creatively, artistically, we were still in a desert. It was kind of a dry spell.
Yeah, and Reagan was able to stimulate the economy by using all the tricks of short-term gain and creating huge deficits and so on, busting unions, and making the life of the few even better while making the life of the many worse. But what you saw on the surface was a lot of money being spent. If you look at the movie Wall Street, that pretty much sums up what was going on.
Well, and also, if you take a look, the greatest dichotomy, whether you can tell if a society is doing well or not doing well, is the voice of the music, of the art that comes out of it. I would say the 60s is probably one of the most passionate eras as far as music, because that gave rise to the singer-songwriter. It gave them an availability to have a platform, to have a stage, to kind of talk about these things. And with the meltdown that happened in the 70s and the facade, the rebuild that started in the 80s, you heard it in that music as well, because at the end of the decade, you were getting bands like Devo You were getting bands like Stormtroopers of Death. You were getting bands like the Plasmatics.
Yeah.
All of these radical bands that are like, you guys just aren't listening. So let us go ahead and tip you over the edge and see if you figure it out.
Yeah. Something had to give, and the scene exploded. You're right. It was because the hypocrisy was so high, and the cultural upheaval and the suffering was so grave. You're right. The art took on an explosive edge, and all that stuff happened within like a 2-3 year period. I mean, television, Patti Smith, the Talking Heads, the Damned, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, Devo, and the bands you mentioned. It was exploding everywhere. And what was fantastic is each band was very different. And so there was really a lot of diversity going on at the same time of this creative explosion. So there's almost an inverse relationship between how comfortable people are with the culture they're growing up in and what the art produced is. So the more comfortable, the worse, more vapid the art.
Well, and honestly, art is supposed to be the mirror to society. It's supposed to be able to show you.
I think it's the canary in the coal. It's the canary in the coal mine.
Yes, I completely agree. And just to let the chat know, of course, at the top of the hour is when our Q&A starts. Please do feel free to have your questions ready and loaded. I'll be asking for them soon. And if you are looking, especially because I'm looking forward to getting the 2 new books that came out about Devo, which were actually made by Devo and not some outside source. And we'll get to talking about that a little bit later as well. But down in the description link, you will see the official band website where I believe the book is going to be available. Also, we do have Gerald's Twitter down there. All my stuff's down there, of course. And just to do a little speaking out, I do have a new category down in the description. It's a prescription for additional entertainment. These are people that I like to watch, that I like to listen to, that have something important to say or are incredibly entertaining. And you should take your time out. When it gets to the end of this, if you get into a replay, go down and sub to these people. Blackout by Dawn, Zach Lomby Live, Disky Fringo, and of course, Trippy Poop. All of these people have something to say. And of course, it's always better to burn out than fade away. But as soon as we get to the top of the hour, we will get into the questions. But I can't help but say this. But I found Devo to be subversive in a good way.
We wanted to, yeah, that's a compliment.
So now this one, so the way I look at it, there was a lot of family in the band too,
right?
But it seems that the band became a family, and it was kind of a unified front. I would never read like an old Cream magazine about, or a Rolling Stone, where you guys were having a boatload of infighting, where it was, no, I'm not comfortable with this direction. Devo seemed to be, if you'll pardon the expression, like a military unit. They were focused and moving forward and presenting the agenda that was important. Is that a fair estimation?
Well, sure, because we were doing things on purpose, and we were in agreement on why we were doing what we were doing, and we would talk about it among ourselves. So we had what might be called like talking points that a political group might have, or an affirmative action group might have. In other words, you are presenting a united front because you're speaking with one voice. And you realize how hostile the world is and how everybody's just looking for an excuse to get in there and, cause trouble, like bring you down, break you up. Because people are threatened by anybody that acts upon the world in an organized way. They want to see it degenerate into chaos to relieve themselves.
And I will admit, it took me a little bit of time to get into Devo, but the thing that crystallized it for me was your appearance on Fridays.
Right.
I had never seen anything, and I hope I can express this appropriately, that made me feel uncomfortable about the performance.
Right.
That the mechanical nature made me want to learn more. Because I didn't get it. I was like, they're saying something, but I don't understand. I mean, it was a live performance, and of course, you know, there are no reruns back then. And,
right.
They're saying something, and I need to figure out what it is. So that started my quest to the fandom.
Was that the one with the synchronized track?
Yes.
Right. Because we were on Fridays 3 times, but I like that one the most.
Yeah. It was just an amazing, jaw-dropping performance, and you guys didn't have, like, you know, back then you've got arena rock bands with the flashing lights and the big pyro and the smoke and everything, and this was so economical. It was stripped down, it was bare, and it drew you towards the performance because you knew something was going on and you wanted to know more.
Right. Yeah. That's what people liked about Devo, was that we were operating like machines, but at that point we weren't using machines. The only thing, you know, machined that night were the treadmills, but everything you were hearing, we were playing, and yet we would play it with precision, the same way that James Brown's Flames played with precision, except, you know, a different style of music. But yeah, that's what people couldn't believe. It's like, are they really doing that? How on Saturday Night Live, people thought that it was a video trick, that they had sped up video. And, you know, that was just us. That's how intense we were right then.
Now, I do have to ask about this, because I had a brief conversation with Roger Corman, and one of the things that I asked him was it true that initially Rock and Roll High School, instead of the Ramones, they wanted to have Devo as the actual band?
What did he say?
He said yes. He said, yes, initially we wanted to pursue Devo, but they had blown up at the time, and we didn't think that we could get them.
Oh, yeah, because I'm not aware of this. I never turned down an offer. Not to say that we wouldn't have, because we would have probably thought it was such a stupid idea that it wasn't right for Devo.
To be honest with you, I could not imagine Devo doing Rock and Roll High School, and this is no slam at the Ramones. I love the Ramones.
See, they were right.
They were gods. I mean,
they were right for that idea. They could do that.
Oh yeah, but I don't think you could have synced up with the low budget antics that they would have done, because everything that I saw Devo doing then was high concept, maybe low budget, but always high concept. And I found that to be an amazing thing. That's what drew me in further and further to the band and the music. And the kids who are listening out in the audience, when they used to print vinyl albums, they would actually put lyrics in with them, so you could read the actual sleeve when the song was going on. That's why when your mom and your dad are able to recite songs, when they pop up on the radio on that oldie station, they're able to do it just because of the fact that we had that availability. It wasn't the record company cutting down on the costs or saying, well, they really don't need to know what the band's saying because it's inconsequential, which happened in the 90s and the 2000s. but
Right.
we're getting ahead of ourselves. I do want to make sure, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming up on the Q&A session. If you do have a question for Gerald Casale, please do make sure and load it on up. But I do want to talk about one other thing, because the hardest thing in the world for a band to get is representation. The first album that's critically known, and I know personally because I've collected a few of them, there were a ton of Devo bootlegs out there before the official release.
Oh yeah.
I mean, a ton. There are just as many Devo bootlegs out there as there are Jimi Hendrix bootlegs. And that is an amazing number of bootlegs. Did you guys decide, yeah, let's go ahead, let's get into a studio, let's go ahead and make our definitive statement on this? Was it an opportunity to where somebody said, okay, well, we'll go ahead and give you a record contract? How did you pursue being able to press your first album?
Well, you know, we were just trying to, and again, there was no terminology like this. What we were doing, unbeknownst to us, was building the brand. And we were, you know, a multimedia band intentionally from the beginning. You know, I was making the videos with my friend Chuck Statler, who was a film student. Mark and I were doing all the art. I designed the stage shows and the costumes. And we were trying to get out whatever we could get out in our do-it-yourself aesthetic with no money, you know. And so we were pursuing every avenue very, very, you know, discerningly. We made that 10-minute film, The Truth About Deevolution, when nobody could figure out why we were doing that. And the reason we were doing that is we believed naively that Laserdisc were going to be the next big thing. And what we were going to do is put out one Laserdisc each year with music-driven film shorts that told us overall story. And then we weren't going to get a rock band on a label or tour or anything. We were going to make Devo anthology on Laserdisc. That's what we were going to do. But
well, and I do find that and I'm sure you probably already know this, that the first time the Grammys gave a video album award was to Michael Nesmith for
Right.
Elephant Parts.
Right.
And, you know, they thought that was incredibly revolutionary because he just beat MTV. He put this concept together, but then again, that's something that the Beatles were working on as well. Putting together music videos.
Yeah, I mean, we admired what Richard Lester did with them, and we met Mike Nesmith when we came out to California. And
now,
you know what was great about that is he didn't think we were idiots. He got it. You know, he knew what we wanted to do, and he understood it and encouraged us. And so we were playing in clubs just to get better at music, at the music part of Devo, and thinking that maybe we could get to the point where we could make some money. I went to New York pretending to be Devo's manager in March of 1977 and met with Hilly Crystal at CBGB's, met with the promoter at Max's Kansas City. After I had gone and met this guy, Alan Betrock, who had New York Rocker, which was the hip free newspaper, you know, it's like our LA Weekly. And I was told to do that by Chris Stein of Blondie. And luckily, Alan totally got it. I showed him the video, played him the single, because we had a self-produced single. So we had the pack. We were doing everything we could do back then.
Okay, I had to ask, what was the single?
People use social media today and have their YouTube channel. What we did back then was a self-produced single, a video, graphics, right? You know, and I went around beating on doors. And we got us booked into CBGB's and Max's, and that created an explosion of media interest and label interest for the first time. So then
so what was the single?
California. What's that?
What was the single that you shot?
Was the original Jocko Homo backed with Mongoloid, not the versions that show up on the first Warner Brothers record, but the Boogie Boy label that we created. We had it pressed in Cincinnati at Queen City Records.
No, gotcha. I know Queen City. I was a native Ohioan, so yeah, I can appreciate them.
Yeah, Mark and I drove down there with our master tapes, and we were there for the whole thing, you know, when they make the parts and the whole deal and the pressing, and then drove them back to Akron and sat around in our friend's apartment, packaging them with a kind of a three-sided cover that we could fold it over, and started bringing them to, you know, the local independent record stores in Cleveland and Akron, and sending them to Bomp Records in California, sending them to Stiff Records in England, samples, doing everything we could do, you know, in an organized way. I was like a pseudo manager. So what happened was we backed up the New York performances with the big summer in California, where that's when we meet up with Iggy Pop, Dean Stockwell, Tony Basil, Neil Young, and it goes from there. We meet because of Iggy. I have meetings with David Bowie's lawyer, Stan Diamond, and then his manager at the time, and he gets interested in us, and he says he wants to produce us. So we arrange to leave California, go back to Ohio, and get ready to play at Max's to synchronize it with David Bowie's a trip to New York from Germany, so that he can come on stage and announce us at Max's. And that happens right before Thanksgiving in 1977. And that leads to going into the studio instead with Brian Eno, since David kept lopping us off because he had a movie, then he had this, then he had that. And so we go in with Brian Eno into Connie Plank's studio in Germany and record the first record with a right of first refusal by Warner Brothers, who's, you know, laid out the deal terms that they will give us if they like the record that Brian does. And they lay out the deal that they'll give Brian as a producer and the money they'll give him. So it was all contingent upon what it sounded like. And of course they bid. But by that time, you're right, there were dozens of bootlegs from our New York and LA performances, and San Francisco, actually, Mabuhay Gardens. There were probably more bootlegs from there.
Yep, I have one.
Yeah. And it was just a time of just great experiences and energy, and, you know, things changing by the day, and so many things happening at once, so much action, so many decisions. It was exciting and frightening.
And I can imagine at this point, you were mid-20s?
Well, I'd like to claim that, but no. At this point, as we got signed to Warner's, I was 29.
Oh, okay. So you were still 20s. That's amazing. That's very much a being caught in the middle of a maelstrom.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of things happening at once. Plus, at the time when Devo hit finally nationally and worldwide, there was a major explosion of eclectic music. A lot of people don't realize that as disco was surging and dying, also hip hop was coming up.
Right.
Rap had started.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speed metal, death metal,
yes.
Bubblegum rock. All of this was hitting at one time. It was right. An amazing time as a music lover to be alive, and to be able to wade through this. And I mean, basically, I would say about 70% of it was, let's be kind, surface level music.
But that's not even a bad percentage. I mean, if you look at anything, any area of creativity at any point in time, 90% of it is bullshit and derivative. I don't care if it's furniture design, modern dance, films, painting. Look, all we remember are the people that were original.
Well, I cannot disagree on that. And and with that, we'll go ahead and start our start a little bit of Q&A here.
All right.
I do have to mention that our sponsorship is coming to an end with New Amsterdam Vodka, but I would like to make sure and give them their plug. Tonight, New Amsterdam Vodka is raspberry vodka and mixed with Sprite. That makes your fizzy fruity dream. So if you only have $13 and you want some vodka, then please choose New Amsterdam Vodka, the vodka that will give you a buzz.
You know what? I'm trying to launch D-Vodka. Would you go for D-Vodka? It'd be a high-end, triple distilled potato vodka, gluten-free D-Vodka.
You would get free sponsorship on this show for the rest of its existence until I die of a heart attack.
I'm not even kidding.
Oh, and I'm not kidding either.
I would do it.
And even my wife is sitting over here going, "What? I would drink that." Because yeah. Anything that is made from spuds, for spuds,
right?
I'm completely about it.
Right.
And we will get into the winemaking part too, because I'm fascinated about that. The first question, well, not a first question, but it's an ask from my Mr. Zwengel. He is asking if you would give a shout out to his daughter Sophia, because he apparently got her hooked on your music.
How old is Sophia? Do you know?
I do not know, but apparently she is in the chat as well. So I'm guessing she's a young adult.
Okay, I was just wondering if she was like 4. That'd be great. A 4-year-old Devo fan. Well, hey Sophia, I hope you're enjoying this warts and all realism, as sad as it may sound.
No, see, the beauty is in the warts themselves, because without the warts, we cannot be appreciative of the beauty. Gaius the King Gracchus asks, what was it like to meet David Bowie?
You know, a lot of times when I would meet people that I had looked up to, and because of Devo finally got to meet, it would ultimately be disappointing because they were less than what you thought. That was not the case with David Bowie at all. It's everything you might think. He was a pretty amazing mercurial presence, and he was smart, and there was, you felt slightly uneasy, and his energy and sexuality was like just bigger than life and in your face, and you were hypnotized by him. I mean, this guy was a charmer. Well, he could have told us, hey, listen, I'm going to take 85% of everything you make, and we would have gone, okay.
Well, and let's just briefly talk about this too. You were a band's band. The people who were, hitting the Billboard charts, being the number ones, top, they all had not only a fascination, but a recommendation for Devo as well. Not only like David Bowie, but Brian Eno.
Iggy Pop.
Iggy Pop. I even heard Mick Jagger as well.
Yeah. And then later on, like Trent Reznor liked us, and Nirvana. They covered a song.
Mm-hmm.
Nirvana did, and Rage Against the Machine covered "Beautiful World." It's nice to have among professionals that kind of support. I mean, it's really important, means a lot to us when somebody that we respect creatively returns it and likes us.
Well, and I think one of the biggest social commentaries that you can get about your band and how impactful it was. Your band was honored by Weird Al Yankovic. And
he's got a star on Hollywood Boulevard, and we don't.
Yep, just got his star. And I remember Mark Mothersbaugh kayfabing about listening to the song "Dare to Be Stupid,"
right?
And saying that he hated Weird Al because he wished he would have written that song. And I can think of no better cultural icon to. He is the weather vane, pointing out to people that, yes, this music was important and important enough to parody. And I think that also speaks volumes about Devo. I mean, you were a band's band, and he didn't hesitate. Weird Al did not hesitate when he had the availability to make a song that was an homage to your band. And,
well, we inspired a lot of parodies. I think anybody that takes their art very far does inspire parodies, because people see something so stylized that they're able to imitate it and make fun of it.
Well, yeah, I think that is one of the ultimate cultural compliments, to where somebody can say, okay, we understand you. We know where you're going with this. And, here's a little, as they'd say in wrestling, here's a little bit of shine for you.
Right. And Al did a good job, where if you're gonna parody somebody, your parody's got to be smart. And his Dare to Be Stupid was smart.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it followed along, and I won't say anything.
He got it.
Devo was not preachy.
No.
They were agent provocateurs.
Right.
And I think Al in his parody also carried that on as well. He found the soul, the chutzpah, and pushed it a little farther down the road in the only way that he knew how to do it. And right. Once again, I think that is an amazing compliment to a band like Devo, because when I was a teenager and Devo was out, you were one or two sides. You either hated it or you loved it. There was no middle ground to it.
That's what I love. That's the only stuff I like.
And the people who hated it, now that I'm in my 50 something, my friends who despised it, ridiculed it, I catch them listening to it. And I'm like, oh, you get it now, don't you? And so that's the best payback. I'm trying not to ignore the chat here. What was the best show lineup that Devo ever performed in?
God, we didn't often perform with other people, believe it or not, because the whole idea about Devo was it was going to be a singular experience. So from the beginning, I had our manager convincing promoters to let us show our films as the opening act, and then we'd come on and call it an evening with Devo. But when we started doing festivals, we did get to play with some really interesting combos, like when we played with Soundgarden and Metallica and the Ramones in Arizona on Lollapalooza.
Oh, I would have loved to have seen that.
And a windstorm kicked up and almost brought down the truss on top of Metallica. Holy
hell. But yeah, I mean, you do an extensive amount of touring, and we'll definitely get around to that, because needless to say, the band is never broken up. It's always been on hiatus until the opportunity presents itself. And I will be sad when you guys finally do the Stick a Fork in It tour, but I will be there as well. We have Jack T. Ripper, the Gulf City serial killer, asking, did Devo feel like they were competing against bands like Thomas Dolby and other types of new wave bands?
Oh no, I mean we never felt like that. You know, I think once again, prevailing WWF type culture, you know, like us and them, you know, sports teams, conflict. Radio looked at it that way because you're competing for the airwaves with these other bands. They're only going to add so many singles per month or whatever. So the way the record company was looking at it was like, you know, a competition. And we never thought about that.
And honestly, just from a fan's a music fan's viewpoint, you guys were kind of traveling in the same direction as the other new wave bands because you got lumped into it. But once people started actually listening to bands like yourself and one of my other favorite bands, XTC,
right,
all of a sudden you just see them, you guys diverging away from that mainstream culture because you were pushed into a group, but you were never in that group. You were always going your own way.
But I mean, there were bands that were like succumb to record company pressure, and they, you know, record company would go in, you got to go in the studio and cut a song that sounds like, you know, She Blinded Me with Science, right? Do something like that. And we just, that was a non-starter for us. We never did anything like that. And we really admired other bands that were doing their thing as originally as we were doing our thing. And we loved and became friends with Heaven 17. And I became good friends with Martin Ware. I ended up like hanging out with him at he had a place in Venice on the island of Giudecca. It was just a fantastic time.
Martin Ware is very talented.
He's a great guy too, a nice guy.
Now, so when you're kicked back, relaxing, what's the vinyl that you put onto the turntable when you guys were touring?
Yeah, and there was vinyl back then. We were listening to Noi a lot.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
Noi. And what is it? NEU? Noi, the German band Noi.
Oh my.
We were listening to that. And we were listening to Deutsch Friends Americanas. They had a great 12-inch that went on for 20 minutes called Duder Mussolini. And we were listening to a lot of stuff like that, like, quote, krautrock and electronica, early electronica.
So you were looking for your oral stimulation outside the U.S. then?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. If I was going to listen to anything from the U.S., it was always older James Brown.
Yeah, and one thing that people don't realize is when the 80s hit, there was a resurgence back into blues culture as well.
Yes.
And
yeah. I personally loved that, you know, because I grew up listening to blues and R&B. So
yeah, that's what I was going to ask, because you don't have the sound of blues, but you have the soul of blues, if that makes sense.
Right. We didn't. Yes, we did not imitate the that form of music, but you could say that Devo was a white man's blues band. That's for sure.
Definitely, because of the tonality. I mean, a lot of blues mention that, you know, things suck and I'm going to have to change it. If I'm not going to change it, then I'm just going to sit here and waller in it. And Devo basically push forward that agenda.
If you listen to like Going Under, for instance, you know, it's pulling from black music, but of course it gets so twisted by Devo that you don't recognize that. It isn't obvious, but like it's like swingy, like R&B, and the bass line is almost like R&B and blues. And then the lyrics, you know, are about a journey, about going under and embracing the dark side.
Well, and we'll definitely get to the Darkest album because, like I said, it is my favorite. But as just a quick sidebar, I know that Freedom of Choice, the album with Girl You Want was the first time that I ever had any type of kinky sex, and I'd like to thank you guys for that because I think that inspired the whole deal. But let me grab back to the chat here. Sisyphus asks, what are your thoughts on the band Bad Brains?
I have to reach back for that one. I'm trying to think more about Bad Brains right now. Thought about them in a long time.
Because honestly, they're still around, but they're limping along.
Limping along. Yeah. Well, Bad Brains don't get better. You know, Bad Brains just getting worse.
Well, that's
I'm kidding. I mean, I think, you know, they definitely had a great edge to them.
And this is not a question, but a comment. We are honored that Revenge of the Nerds took a bit of Devo during the talent show.
Right.
And that's, I don't know. When did you sense that Devo was actually becoming iconic, was becoming part of the cultural zeitgeist?
Right. In other words, was being accepted into the mainstream.
Yeah. No, it basically tapped the vein. And I mean, especially in the 80s, and we can still do Devo callbacks, and the younger generation still kind of recognizes it.
Well, I think that when they wanted us to perform on square pegs, I knew we had been ostracized by the mainstream.
And what was your favorite venue to play?
Oh my God, that's pretty easy. My favorite venues weren't the largest ones. They're the ones around 6,000 to 10,000 seats, like Radio City Music Hall. That playing there was unforgettable. Like probably one, if not the best, one of the three best. The Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles, just an incredible venue to play in. Unbelievable. The Palladium in New York was a fantastic venue to play in. But there were some others in Europe, and I'm just trying to remember. You know, some of those big old halls in England, in London. There's a famous place because they were all like originally like live theaters with, you know, they have the box seats and the proscenium arch stages and the.
Did you play the Hammersmith?
Yes, of course, more than once.
Oh my! What a place to do a show.
Yeah. In fact, we have a recording from there, in 1979.
Oh no, that one I haven't found.
At the height of precision. We're playing so well, I can't even believe it when I hear it.
Now I haven't found that one yet. Now I'm going to have to go hunting.
Well, I'm not sure you can find that one, and I'm not sure ever why it wasn't released. I think it had something to do with Warner Brothers may have paid for the sound truck, but then we supposedly paid them back, but they didn't recognize that, and there was a rights issue. Oh, Beta, what's wrong? No bark. Beta, look. See? That's Beta. Sorry. Anyway,
well, you know, if you guys ever stumble across that and want to press it, you know, you have at least one buyer out there.
I think we should. It's really good. I know it was on 16-track tape. I hope that tape still, I hope it isn't decrepit beyond saving.
Yeah, I've never been witness to anyone who's ever been to a Devo concert who has ever been disappointed by the performance. It's picture perfect, kind of like, I don't know if you've ever heard Rush live as a pair, as opposed to them on vinyl. They are technically perfect as well, but then again, you get the visual accent when you actually go see a band live. Do you think that nowadays that these generations, these current generations, are missing out because they're not becoming engaged with the bands when they come around and when they tour? Because I know, back in my days that it was, oh, we really like the album, let's go see them. There was no MTV. There weren't any music videos to speak of, and that was our availability to connect with the band. Do you think there's a disconnect in music currently that's like that?
It's different now. So the position of music in culture, its meaning, its importance is completely different. It's almost frighteningly so different that you can't even draw parallels. And yes, you just have tons of social media. Then you have all the clips on YouTube of anybody that's out there, and all those performers perform the same way and use the same kind of reality of staging and lights. So, I mean, Ariana Grande, Drake, you keep naming them, and it all looks alike in the way they do things. It's all kind of formulaic,
cookie cutter.
Yeah, and that wasn't the case then. So yes, Devo was theatrical, and when you came to see Devo, you got 3 more dimensions than you did on vinyl. Plus, you got the power of the music that you didn't get on vinyl. And yes, I've seen Rush more than once live, and I directed 2 of their music videos, so I know what real musicians they were and how well they could play live. It was kind of unbelievable, but they weren't conceptual or theatric.
Oh no, not at all. I mean, they were a precision band. I will give them that.
I suppose the best performances I've ever seen that truly were multidimensional were Bowie on the Diamond Dogs tour, which is just something that probably can't be beat. I don't think Devo ever even raised up to that level. It was just unbelievable. I think about 10 years ago, 9 Inch Nails did a tour where they were using 3 layers of video walls, where they were using them like partitions, where you could see through them and to see the band in the next layer, and then another one behind it. And they were on wires. They could raise and lower, and dangling fluorescent tubes would come down from the ceiling, and he'd walk among them. And there were, videos that were in sync with the music, like Devo used to do, with characters like Devo used to do on screen singing. And it was just, he had like 10 times the money Devo ever had. And it was mind blowing what I was looking at, and it went on for over 2 hours. I think it was too long personally, but it was incredible.
Yeah, I think that was a tour where The Cure opened for them. But not to sidetrack you at all, but I knew this question was coming. Ed asks, how likely is Devo going to do another tour? Is Mark holding out on touring, or has he moved on? Now, I've heard you in interviews, both with Mark Mothersbaugh as well, talking about it. Speaking from the interviews that I've read, Mark Mothersbaugh is still up for it if he can make time for it. And with that, I will leave that up.
Well, yeah, that is the face he presents to the public. Look, he could make time for it anytime he wanted. Nobody's forcing him to take another soundtrack. if he wants to tour, we will tour, just because he's created that dynamic, because promoters aren't going to pay Devo money if it doesn't include Mark. So to be Devo, it has to be both of us. And I think, now's the time. It's like now or never. He should pull the trigger while we can still really, do what we've always done and live up to how we comport ourselves live, so there's no disappointment.
Well, and Devo has lost a lot of good members too.
Well, yeah.
And
I mean, my brother was a mortal blow in the sense that he was such a referee, kind of the Mr. Head screwed on, his shoulders straight, and plus he was a technician. He did a lot of work for Devo on our preparing our programs and our sounds, in our mixes. I mean, he did all of that. He was a studio whiz.
Well, and I definitely want to eulogize Bob too. He was an incredibly important part of the band.
Yeah.
No.
Humble. People didn't know because he wasn't showy, but God, he could play his part really well. And you got to remember, he made up the guitar part for what became Satisfaction. Before it was Satisfaction, we turned it into Satisfaction, playing to the part that he started. That he made that up. He made up parts like that all the time that were really interesting. And he did all these other ancillary things for Devo that were very important. And he was the voice of reason. Alan was the human metronome. There'll never be a drummer for Devo better than Alan Myers. I mean, we had to recently, in the last 10 years, we kept getting requests for Whippet for use in film and for use in commercials. And sometimes we'd do our own parodies where they'd ask for a parody of Whippet. We thought there's nothing more Dada than us doing our own parody, so that people are shocked to hear Mark and I singing, ridiculous lyrics. And the reason I'm bringing this up is we had to go back to the 16-track masters. We isolated Alan's drum beat, and we put a beat map to it because they wanted to be able to cut film to it. We beat mapped it. He varied somewhere in the bridge of the song. He varied around 2 BPM. Other than that, the song ends at the same BPM it started, and there were no click tracks.
Well, and the amazing syncopation that he did with Satisfaction too.
Unbelievable.
I mean, I know a lot of drummers, and it's like, oh yeah, but can you play Satisfaction? Oh yeah, man, I can do Stones. No, can you do the Devo Satisfaction?
Nobody can do it. I mean, Josh Freese comes really close. He comes really close.
Well, you wouldn't believe how many bar bets that I've won off of that. Because
it's a jazz part.
Yeah.
It's a jazz part. And that's what people don't understand. It only sounds like you can do it. Then you go to try to do it.
Well, and I've had drummers come back to me and go, man, I thought Bonham was hard to play. But I think that speaks volumes, and definitely Devo is not just a plug and play band. These losses were of a great magnitude.
Yeah.
And I know both Alan and Bob must be smiling down and going, all right, come on, Mark, it's time to do that Stick a Fork in It tour.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, this follows on the tail end of what we were talking about. Zach Lonby asks, how do you feel knowing that every person in a generation knows your work, even if they don't know it's yours?
Well, I mean, that's gratifying. Makes me feel like I'd maybe accomplished something, which is what I was always trying to do, is, you know,
Oh,
create something lasting, create something, put it out in the world.
And I'm a little bit behind, but I'm catching up to our conversation. Oh, by the way, so Sophia says she's actually 14.
Okay. Okay,
So
that's how old most of our audience was when we first hit the scene.
Yeah, I was around that age myself. Darren Zwengel asks, who's the bigger asshole, Trump or Pence?
Unfortunately, Pence isn't really an asshole like Trump. I mean, Trump is a psychotic clown and, you know, perverse and just a menial, mean-spirited man. Now, Pence, he's the real deal. Imagine that guy in an SS uniform. I mean, really, just change the suit into an SS uniform and watch his face and watch how he operates. He is to the right of Trump.
Oh, well, you know, who doesn't like wearing Hugo Boss?
Well, I mean, if it was up to Pence, like say Trump did get impeached or explodes one night while he's ranting on Twitter, and Pence was our president, you might really have the Handmaid's Tale.
Oh my! And I tell you what, let's go ahead and do this now. I know there's a 10-second delay, but everybody in the chat, I've caught up to the vodka conversation. Let's throw some ones in the chat of anybody who would actually buy. Spudus actually asks if you would call it Devodka.
Yes, we call it Devodka. Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, Victor Rand said I would buy the fuck out of that. Potato vodka, you just woke me up.
Here, let me send it to you. I'll show you what it would look like right now.
And don't think I would not promote the hell out of it.
Okay.
One of my good buddies. Oh, wait a minute. I need to stop talking so we can see it.
No, it's okay. Wait, I'm going to send it to you. Here it goes.
Okay.
I sent you an email. You can show your fans.
I will Twitter that, by golly. And I am serious. I will be your biggest advocate. We are talking to the Norwegians right now about doing Viking Fjord to replace New Amsterdam.
Okay.
And yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, hold on. Let me just.
That's the link.
I will. Bear with me here for a moment. I will go share that, and I will link it to you. So, chat, if you want to bounce over, you can actually.
And of course, we've secured Devodka.com, where you get to our primate there drinking the cocktail. Invite you to follow him.
Oh, I will. You know, if that coming around, if I've got a bottle sitting next to me, I will definitely put that permanently in the links. You know that. Because honestly, if you can make music that good, I have no doubts you can make vodka even better.
Well, you know, vodka's easy compared to making songs. You just got to start with good potatoes and distill it properly. And you know, all vodka's like lighter fluid anyway. It's like once they blind taste people on vodka, people can't even pick the expensive ones from the cheap ones. Ours would be smooth and viscous. It'd be beautiful. And it'd be non-gluten vodka.
That's not a bad thing.
No.
You know, wifey's on the keto diet, so she's like, okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
My favorite potatoes, the only
Yeah, her favorite potatoes are the only ones she can put an olive in.
There you go. Exactly.
And now this is a great question. This goes very deep into the lore. Where did the Boogie Boy idea come from?
Well, Mark and I were avid collectors of novelties and ephemera, and especially full head rubber masks. And we discovered this place in Canton, Ohio. Ohio was rife with these kind of wax stores with amazing stuff in them. And this place had the most amazing masks. And we went to this store and we were just in awe. We were like kids in the candy store. And I bought this full head rubber chimpanzee mask, and he bought the full head baby mask. They were both made in Germany. They were both amazingly well sculpted
and incredibly creepy.
Oh yeah. Well, that's why we were buying them. I mean, come on, masks are creepy. It's like clowns. We were just mesmerized by clowns because they're so evil. And that'll get us to talking about the record "Oh No, It's Devo." But so we would buy these masks, and then it didn't stop there. Every day was Halloween for Devo. We didn't wait for Halloween. We'd put them on, and we'd go places in the masks. Today you would be taken down by a SWAT team, but we would go to the mall, like in Fairlawn, outside of West Akron. We would go to the malt shop, right? And we would be talking in character. And in one of these talks, and Mark would oftentimes have a little cassette recorder. Instead of wearing the ape mask, I had on what now would be considered racist glasses because they were from a novelty store. They were called chop suey specs.
Okay, I know them.
Yeah, where you're suddenly Asian. And I didn't wear them to make fun of Asians. I was just inspired because we had been watching on television the, what was the show with Grasshopper?
Kung Fu.
Kung Fu. We were watching Kung Fu all the time. And I was putting on this faux kind of, Eastern wisdom, like I was some kind of, guru. And talking like this. And I called him Boogie Boy. And he started acting out Boogie Boy. So he became Boogie Boy. So we inspired each other, and then he started developing a whole repertoire as Boogie Boy.
Well, I tell you, the most disturbing collab I saw was with you and Neil Young.
Yeah.
And they would, and Mark was doing Boogie Boy, and that right. That literally creeped me out.
Yeah, and we were doing the pinheads. Bob Mothersbaugh and I had the pinhead masks on.
Oh yeah.
And, yeah.
And now here's a good friend of mine. What they call on the internet a boomer, because we're all boomers. If we can look back and say, I used to buy that for put in your price.
I'll buy that for $1.
Yeah.
I'll buy that for $1. RoboCop.
Yeah, buy that for $1.
I love that.
Irate Prostate wants to know, how long did you work with Brian Eno?
Well, just for that one record. I mean, we were in the studio a month with Brian.
And that was for the Are We Not Men? Right.
We never worked on another album with Brian.
Well, and I did hear that, or from interviews that I've read, that you went ahead and ditched most everything that he did.
Well, yeah.
Well, no, it's not a slam. It's, I think, that he was trying to be too velvet.
Well, he'd moved on from his persona in Roxy Music and the wildness, wackiness, with the boa, the feather boas, and the kind of drag makeup, and the skin tight pants. And he had moved on to being very zen. He had created that deck of cards called Oblique Strategies. He had become kind of kung fu, and he was very into beauty because he'd been making those ambient records like "Here Come the Warm Jets," and so most of the stuff he put on was antithetical to our brutalism, minimalism, industrial Ohio aesthetic that we were so married to at that point. We couldn't understand why he was putting all these pretty parts on there and singing harmonies, but that's what he heard. He thought he was enhancing it, fixing it. And we didn't know what to do about that because we weren't really open to that at that point. It's not what we wanted to hear. And I suppose we could go back to the master tapes and remix them with the stuff in it and show everybody what he did.
Well, and I did read somewhere one of my favorite songs is "Uncontrollable Urge."
Right.
He's
on that one.
Yeah, that's pretty much the only piece that Brian Eno is on because he's doing backup.
Yeah. He's really a good harmonic singer.
There was some amazing stuff done in there, and I hate it when people do just a drive-by and say, "Oh well, Devo, that was just kind of another band." It's like, well, everything that's out right now is going to be just kind of another band in 20 years. But if you go back, and the two bands that I point out most times that are underrated and incredibly misunderstood are XTC and Devo.
Right.
Because there were so many other things going on. And if you talk to musicians about the music that you made and about the music that Mr. Partridge made, they will undeniably say, yeah, there was more to that. There were layers upon layers. And that's what makes it beautiful. But because they're so easy on the ears, a lot of people just go ahead and pass it by. They kind of drone out, if that makes sense. Another reason why people need to read the lyrics of the things that are coming. And I did want to get this question out of the way because this is a weird one, but I'm going to ask this anyway. Scott's 1973 asks, what do you think of the Cash Me Outside girl?
Oh.
Oh, God.
Well,
Dr. Phil references, for God's sake.
I think she's evidence that we were right about Deevolution is real.
I won't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Now, I definitely want to do... I want to talk about one of the albums that is my favorite album, which is Oh No, It's Devo, because the critics were slamming you guys.
Oh, I know.
Saying that you were soft, that this was just bubble gum, that this was just elevator float through kind of music. And I think Oh No, It's Devo crystallized the fact that literally saying that you reviewers are incredible morons. Okay, you want something that you think you can understand? Here, let's do this. And out came Oh No, It's Devo. You guys...
Well, I don't know how they say those things they said. I don't know. Because, listen to Peekaboo, #1.
Sure. and Speed Racer. And then on the complete flip side, you get Big Mess.
And how about I Desire with lyrics by John Hinckley Jr.?
Oh yeah, and honestly, I like the demo version.
Mm-hmm.
The demo version is much creepier than what came out on the album, but
you're right.
That album front to back, for the fans who love Devo, understood that it was a giant FU to say, okay, You don't understand us. Here, I'm going to throw something else into your wheelhouse. Let's see if you understand this. And they didn't.
Well, our message to critics was on the song Explosions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what we had to say to them. It's like, we like ideas understood.
Well, and I know
places.
Well, and I know that if they didn't see, I mean, literally the whole parody that you had set up with Speed Racer,
right.
It was kind of like one of those jokes where you could literally see the lyrics flying over their head. It was a great commentary on society.
Right.
And they were just missing it. They were like, this is path. This is just a do nothing to fill up the album. And it's like, do you guys not understand that from the first track to the end track, 30, a little over 30 minutes worth of music has just kicked your ass into the gutter and you're not realizing it.
I know.
I mean, that's what amazed. I mean, I love the early stuff, but this was literally a concept that you guys put forward, and it was strung together very intelligently, and they missed it. They completely missed it.
Totally missed it. Yeah. And including the evil clown laughter in Peekaboo.
Yeah, and even the videos were a nice FU.
Oh yeah.
And that's going to be my segue to get into the fact that a lot of people don't realize you directed most all of the Devo videos.
Yeah.
You became a director and also directed other bands.
Yeah.
What gave you the bug?
That started way back at Kent State University when I met Chuck Statler, and we were both film buffs, but he was taking filmmaking classes from a guy named Richard Myers, who was like a one-man film department at Kent State University. But the guy was brilliant, and the guy was smart, creative. He had won awards for his art films, and Chuck had some money, and he bought a 16 millimeter bootlegs, and so we started making some experimental films together. And of course, he watched me working with Mark, creating Devo from its earliest inception, and he and I would constantly talk about making Devo movies, and then finally did make that 10-minute film, The Truth About Deevolution, in 1976.
It was fun.
He got submitted to the Ann Arbor Film Festival, and it won an award for Best Comedy Short.
Well, no, I mean, there was brilliance in it just because of the fact that you were going off of so many levels, and there were too many people, especially, I mean, let's talk about this. Disco was all the rage when you guys were hitting. Yeah. So a lot of people were looking for just incredible shallowness. They were just looking to what they could snort cocaine to and dance.
Right.
And you guys came underneath with a groundswell. And I would dare say that if your music came out today, I think it would be better understood. But there are so many people right now that are breaking down. I've seen people that have done doctorate thesis on Devo music. And
well, I think what's happened is, what we were warning about took place and went beyond our worst prognostication. And now Devo's not radical or polarizing or anything else. It's like, oh yeah, right, Devo. Yep, no kidding. In other words, de-evolution's real. Everybody just accepts that.
Well, and even taking it back to new traditionalists, there were a lot of very heavy themes in there. And one of your bigger hits, Freedom of Choice, a lot of people didn't understand when you got to the end of the song, when you said freedom from choice is what you want.
Right. Right.
And that was, to me, yeah, I'm a writer in real life, and I found the lyrics to be incredibly chilling. It's like, don't you guys understand that they're doing exactly what society is doing to you right now? They're providing you with an incredibly poppy, happy beat, and then they're slipping in all the reality underneath it, and you're
Right.
not listening and you're not hearing.
Right.
And there was a comment in the chat earlier saying that Devo should have had a crystal ball. Just on the discussion of, oh no, it's Devo, Michael Pilmer asks, hey, get Jerry to tell you where the Cowboy Kim lyrics came from. Now, I know where they came from, but it's a great story.
Yeah, they came. Crazy fan. You know, we were getting back then tons of fan mail, just, you know, hundreds of pieces of mail every week. And I was trying to go through most of it, but I couldn't. And we had a guy taking care of our merchandise because we had to make our own, because nobody would do what we wanted to do, because it was, you know, Mark and I were creating designs, and they go, no, we don't do that. We don't do t-shirts, different colored sleeves. No, we don't do that.
God, how frustrating.
We would ask the warehouse to go through the mail, and if he found anything, let us know.
Yeah, I ended up getting one of those bootleg new traditional shirts, and I wore the hell out of it, but I couldn't find it, except for there was some guy who actually made it by mail order. So I'm sorry I didn't contribute to the coffers, but you know,
we never made money. It cost so much to make that stuff because we couldn't make a lot of it. We were, you know, small numbers where it's too much per garment. But anyway, he showed the letter. He goes, "You got it," and it was a serious letter to the kid that it was explaining that he was a DJ. He worked out of his basement, and he was clearly mentally disturbed. And we were reading, and it was like another version of John Hinckley. You know, we thought, oh my God, this guy, he could actually end up literally killing something. But I just took the letter and I took the salient lines and I reframed them, you know, cadence wise so they fit to music, and added some, you know, connectors, and that's how Big Mess happened.
Well, and also when we're talking about I Desire, I remember reading it back in the day. We're like, oh, this is an abomination. They're publishing John Hinckley's poetry. For those who are too young, John Hinckley was the guy who decided to shoot Ronald Reagan so he could gain points with Jodie Foster.
Right.
And the thing that a lot of people don't understand is get to the third verse.
Right.
It turns in on itself. And I think that's part of the genius of that's the reason why I enjoyed every time a Devo album came out. It was, let's bust out the vinyl, let's put it on, let's read the lyrics. What were they saying? Right. What is the intent?
That's the only reason we used that Psycho's lyrics, is because that was the idea from the beginning, is I'd add this third verse that commented on exactly what you've just been hearing.
Yeah, and it just frustrates me in the fact that people who were fans, people who enjoyed your music, got it, And all those people who were in the magazines were saying that, this was vapid, this is shallow, it's just, they didn't have any ideas. They were completely wrong. Completely wrong. And
we had more ideas than we could ever use.
Yeah, and that's the amazing thing about Devo. And I will agree with Irate Prostate. If you don't have the first 3 albums with "Oh No, It's Devo," then you're completely missing out. If you're Neil Young fans, if you're Bob Dylan fans, and you liked how the word came through the music, this is, I hate to say, a more intelligent style, but yes, it is a more intelligent style of being able to express an opinion that allows you the availability to think.
Well, we had to meet with Jodie Foster.
Really?
Because she'd, through the grapevine, she'd gotten some, of course, twisted, warped version of what we were doing and freaked out. And her agent and lawyer contacted us and said we couldn't put this song out. And we said, well, we don't think you understand. Why don't you have her come down to the studio? Please have her come down and listen to it. And then if you still say that, okay, we won't put it on the record. So she came to the studio in Hollywood and Fairfax Boulevard when we were working with Roy Thomas Baker.
Yeah.
And we sat down together and she listened to the song and had the lyrics in front of her. And she totally got it. Because by the third verse, we're telling the listener that the girl is right to run away from this psycho. And she said, okay, thanks, and ended up being very nice to me. So,
yeah, obsession is bad. There's a time when desire is wrong.
There you go.
And it's just amazing how that information skates over the heads of people who are supposed professionals. Right. And I think that's what happens with the greatest of bands, is that what do you call them? God, I don't know of a complimentary term, but the music leeches that have no ability to sing or write songs, compose music, play an instrument. This is the only way they know how to bully and push their influence into the music industry. And when it comes down to it, it's completely invalidated because they miss the point of the music.
Yeah.
And I mean, you would think someone who was there and who witnessed the Kent State shootings would have an undercurrent of a little bit of social consciousness and meaning to their music. And, not just
hopefully.
Yeah. And not just, make a song like I Got 99 Problems and a Bitch Ain't One. Let's see. Sisyphus asks, he's asking for your band recommendations. Is there any band we should check out that should have been big but never was? Right.
I think that could be a whole TV series on cable.
Oh, I kid you not. There are a ton of bands I could name. No one would ever know that were just amazing and never got their due, shrugged their shoulders and said, okay, I'm going to get a 9 to 5. And that was it.
I know. It'd be great to cover them and show them and interview them and do like a piece on that. Because I remember the first time that really hit home for me was when we were in the clubs out here in 77. We were, of course, listening to all the bands that were playing on the bills, on the nights before and after us. There was a band in LA called the Screamers. And they were so cool and so far ahead and so original and so creative that I was kind of jealous of what they were doing. It was different than Devo, but it was like you see something that you wish you would have done. And I saw them, a few times at the Whiskey, and they imploded. There was enough chaos and enough misfires. And the fact that they were a local band at a time when record companies out here were only looking elsewhere for bands and kind of slighting their own at home.
Sure.
Right?
Oh, yeah. I remember when in the 70s and 80s that music label representatives would descend on a certain city.
Right. Exactly.
And
like Seattle, but they wouldn't even go out in LA and listen to a band.
Oh, yeah.
But they'd all go to Seattle.
Yeah. And all these bands are like, where can we get booked?
Right.
So they're fighting to survive. And then all of a sudden you get some bands that really shouldn't have been given record contracts. Like there's more than a few of the Seattle bands that should have just faded away and gone bye-bye. When there were other bands out there that were struggling to make do. I do have one band recommendation I would like to make to you, though.
You mean like for now?
They're no longer working.
Okay.
They had to go 9 to 5, but it's a band from Ohio called Aunt Beanie's First Prize Beats. They came around in the early 90s when grunge was taking over.
Mm-hmm.
And their sound was early era Depression music.
Oh, nice.
It's something completely off the beaten path. I wish these guys would get back together. But as far as something that's completely off from anything that's on the DJ turntables right now, I thought that was another one of those bands where they were amazing.
Right.
Victor Rand asks, so is Devo not advertiser friendly?
Oh, I thought we were.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
I can't count the times Whip It and Uncontrollable Urge and Freedom of Choice and Beautiful World have been used. And
oh, yeah.
Course, and it's usually by people that never listen to the lyrics.
Yeah. Wasn't it GM that used Uncontrollable Urge with one of their car commercials?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm like, did you? I'll forget it. You guys aren't going to, if you didn't get it then, you're not going to get it now.
Target used Beautiful World and didn't realize I said for you, but not for me.
Yeah. I mean, and
I love that.
And that's one of the great aspects of Devo music is the fact that if you're going on a base level, you were going to enjoy the music. But if you're going to actually take time with the music and read it, just like XTC, you would understand that there's a deeper meaning, that this isn't just some vapid top 40s tune. That this is something that, I hate to say it, but it was more like a wake the fuck up, people. Stop sleeping. Are you sleeping? I mean, yeah. I found a lot of 1984 and Animal Farm in the music that you were making.
Two of our favorite books.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's
we wanted to do a Devo musical based on Animal Farm, but the rights situation is a total mess.
Yeah, I've heard the Orwell estate is kind of fuckered up.
It would have been so great though, with with that as the book and Devo as the libretto.
Now, when it came down to writing, composing, putting together the music, I'm the kind of guy, I do read, the songs that were written by who.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the music that kind of affected me more, that had that underlying message, definitely had your name in the credits.
Yeah. I mean, about 85% of the songs were co-written by Mark and I. And of those songs, he did more of the music. I did more of the lyrics. But in many cases, we're both contributing to the music.
Yeah, but how does but how does that work? Do you come to him with lyrics? Does he come to you with music?
Yeah, we used to be very open. In the beginning, we would just lay everything out on the table. Like, here's all my ideas today, and here's the new lyrics I wrote in my notebook, and and then somebody'd go, well, here's a figure. Like, can we play this with a beat and a bass line like this? And
I got a feeling that was Bob.
Yeah, and we would then listen to all the pieces, and many times I'd take a piece from there, a piece from here, a piece from there, and I'd create a composition where they were all in one composition, and then sing some lyrics over it to see what Mark thinks, and we were very collaborative, like on a more wide open, democratic, basic level, and that's where all the best songs came from. When it got more guarded, when it was just like him using, a Fairlight and programming something and going, okay, here's the music, see what you can do with this. Then it stopped being vital. It stopped being the Devo that people loved.
Well, and yeah, I wanted to talk about your record in 2010. Everything, the promotion was that you had done it with test groups,
right?
Can you dive a little deeper into that for me? Because I find this completely fascinating. Because I'm thinking, I'll just do my thought up front. I'm thinking that this was another way with messing with the sensibilities.
Of course, it was a complete lie.
Well, please dive deep for me.
Our marketing campaign was making fun of ad company marketing campaigns,
and that's the way that I was taking it.
Well, I mean, we actually conducted with Mother, the agency out of New York. We conducted listening sessions, and they would do it the way they would actually show people animatics and say, what do you think of this, and write down the reactions and with a flow chart of what they liked, what they didn't like. We did all that for real and shot a 5-part mockumentary of Devo interacting with the ad agency. But the ad agency wasn't the real people from the ad agency or the record company. They were actors.
Mm-hmm.
And the only real people in it was Devo. And we were making fun of ourselves, the record company, and ad agencies. And that was the whole point. It was Dada. But then the record company, Warner's, got cold feet and freaked out and shut down the whole thing right when it was starting to really take off, where the press was taking notice. They really shot themselves in the foot. Because, you see, we took the marketing money and convinced them to pay Mother, the ad agency, to create a campaign based on making fun of ad agency campaigns. And they signed off in concept, and then when it started really happening, it scared them. And they pushed back, freaked out, and wasted all the money we spent.
Oh, I would have loved to have seen that in full fruition.
Oh, me too.
That would have been amazing. And you talked about earlier about Devo being an art installation.
Right.
That, to me, seems like the next logical step.
Well, that's what we were doing. And the head creative of Mother, who's this award-winning genius, he's Swedish, Paul Malmstrom, he concocted the whole thing with me, and then he executed it. I mean, he was hip. He got it.
Yeah, and
I knew them well because he had written all these groundbreaking TV spots for Miller Lite, and I directed 9 of them.
Wow.
Where it's like, hi, I'm Dick, a friend. I'm Kenny, a friend of Dick's. The whole Dick campaign, like Dick was supposedly this guy. It was just they went out into the heartland and find a normal guy who told them what he wanted to see in a Miller Lite commercial, and then they would just do what this guy Dick told them to do, supposedly. And then Kenny, a friend of Dick's, came along, and then Kenny wanted to do a cheerleader contest for the Super Bowl, and it was this whole ongoing series, and it was complete absurd data, and it was hugely popular. And the same thing happened there with Miller Lite. The people in Texas, which were the biggest distributor and consumers of Miller Lite, they let their local people weigh in on these commercials for real because they were offended by them.
Ugh.
And they shut down the whole campaign because they gave a lot of power to the local distributors of Miller Lite.
Oh, that's horrible. And just to go back to draw from the bands that I felt were more of an art installation, bands like the Plasmatics.
Oh yeah, I loved them. They were great live.
When I saw them in concert, I was blown away because I did the whole, I get it. I know exactly what they're doing. They're fighting against Reaganism. They're fighting against commercialism. You know, blowing up stuff, smashing TVs. Most of the the devolved people were like, oh, they're blowing shit up. Oh.
Yeah.
But it's like, you don't get it. There are layers to this.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying Devo did it in a highbrow way, but they did it in an intellectual way.
Yeah.
I'll agree. Irate Prostate says the Resonance, another great example. The Resonance.
Oh, yeah, we know those guys. Yeah.
And you've seen them without their gear.
Oh yeah.
Well,
yeah.
there you go. You must be in.
We love their cover of James Brown, It's a Man's World.
Well, and honestly, I thought their music was horrible, but
it was pretty obtuse. Yeah, it's pretty obtuse.
But I got what they were doing.
Yeah.
So that kind of got me back to them to say, yeah, I can't say bad things about this.
Right. Well, doctor.
Yes, sir.
I'm a doctor too.
Yeah, I do those honorary PhDs. They kind of work out for me.
I must go. I have to go.
Well, I will say that it has been an amazing interview, and we didn't even get to touch upon the winemaking.
I know.
But I will say this: you are definitely invited back. Anytime that you would like to talk about anything we have not discussed previously. There are so many people that are saying that this was an amazing interview. They never expected, and these are longtime Devo fans. They never expected this to go the way that it did, but they're incredibly pleased that it did.
Well, hopefully some different aspects to the usual bent that takes place. But you're not a usual guy, Doctor, and your interview isn't usual. And as far as winemaking goes, that's a whole thing on its own. But people can really get the idea because of what I put into the website. If they want to see what I did, the brand is called the 50 by 50 Wines. And if you go to the50by50.com, which is all letters, because an internet parker use the numbers. But if you go to the 50by50.com, you can read what I have to say, see what I'm trying to do, look at the wines. They are very high quality and very well made. I put my heart and soul into it.
And I know there's a Studley person in the chat who has their Google PhD. So everybody's got a wrench. If somebody will look that 50by50 up and drop that link into the chat, I would certainly appreciate it. And of course, if you do want to know more about it, because we didn't even get to talk about the books.
Yeah. I'll come back. I'll come back.
Okay. I will definitely hold you to that. But right now, the official band website is listed down in the chat. It's www.clubdevo.com. And Gerald Casale's Twitter is also listed as well. If you like what you heard, then stop back next Tuesday. I got to do the wrap up. So if you wouldn't mind, Gerald, to hang on for just a second, I'll fill them in what's going on, and then we'll go ahead and close the show. Now, of course, next week, we do have for you, hopefully, Undoomed. It just depends whether or not Hollywood has called him to do some more editing and to do some more digital work, some digital cleanup. But we've got Undoomed scheduled for 9/11. Here's another band I'd love to recommend to you, Gerald. A band called Pony Trap is coming on the 18th. They are amazing. It is a band that is made up with a stand-up cello, a viola, and they could not find a drummer to keep beat with them. So the lead of the band created a drummer.
Sounds good.
And that drummer has lights, has sound, and also has pyrotechnics to it. And they are amazing. We're hoping we can get them to do a performance during the show. It's going to be mind-blowing. And on the 25th, we've got Disky Fringo coming up. To start off October, we have writer extraordinaire and, of course, two-time Eisner Award winner Mike Barron stopping by to give us his insights. This is the first time we've actually had a writer on the show, and I'm really looking forward to pick his brain. And this is amazing, but I will say this, and I have always said this, believe it if you will, or if you don't, it is all of our fans that make this show. It is your enthusiasm. It is your gung-ho-ness that keeps us together. And remember, everybody on the show shares the same common thing, which is flexing your pec. It is, you must have passion for what you do. You have to put forward the effort, and you have to be committed to see it till the end. So in my final diagnosis, I will say there is nothing wrong with our patient, Gerald Casale. As a matter of fact, I am hoping that this disease, so they call it, is contagious, and it spreads on to everyone, so they can be as creative, as outstanding, as individualistic as the man and the band that he created. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, my name is DocGriffon. I certainly appreciate your time coming out with us tonight. And the doctor's office is closed. We'll see you next week.